I've touched on toolbars already, but let's go through it formally now. P6 toolbars operate in the same way as Microsoft Office 2003, and there are tools for displaying toolbars, customizing toolbars, and customizing menus. There's also a status bar at the bottom, and as I said before, I recommend you untick this box here. So let's go through the changes I would normally make to the toolbars. So let me run through the changes I make to the toolbars. On a default load, you'll find that this no bottom layout button is missing, so you want to make sure that that is displayed, this one here. I also right click on the toolbars, I go to customize, and I make sure I go to options, and this menu show recently commands first is unticked, so you see the full commands. Also, when you are in the WBS window here and you want to edit or move your WBS nodes around, you'll find the default load has the blue arrows on the right hand side and you're darting from one side of the screen to the other. So my recommendation is to grab these blue arrows here and move them across to this side so that you don't have to rip across from one side of the screen to the other. Also, you'll probably find that the activity critical path toolbar is hidden. I find it quite useful to have that displayed, and you might want to show the check schedule displayed as well and put them on this side here. A lot depends on how much space you've got on the right hand side as to how many toolbars you can get here and how big your screen is. But definitely the one that I do really recommend you do is to make sure that these blue arrows are on the right hand side. So I now want to discuss user preferences time units formatting. The Edit User Preferences Form Time Units tab here allows users to select how resource units per time and duration units are displayed. The duration format is here and the resource formatting is here. You'll find that personal information was added in version 18. You won't have that if you've got an earlier version. The interesting point is that this is applied to every project and every view anywhere in P6, and it's disappointing that you can't format individual columns with whatever formatting you like, but this is something you have to get used to. So there's a units time format, duration format, and these are the recommended settings, and I'll go to P6 and explain why. So if I have a look at the total free float or duration format here, what you'll see is that I don't know whether it's hours or days, and I don't know whether these are round hours or round days. If I look at the bar here, it's fairly obvious that it's 32 days long. If I select Edit User Preferences and I go to Time Units and I show the duration label and the subunit, and this is my recommended setting, then what happens if I close is I can see that this is not a round duration, and generally with construction scheduling, most scheduling, people like to have the duration as a round duration. So this is really useful that when an activity is around duration, it doesn't show 0 hours, it hides the hours, so you can very quickly see whether the duration or whether the float are round durations and whether your schedule is being well put together or not. So my recommendation is you go to Edit User Preferences and you always show the duration type and subunits. On the resources, normally I would just show the duration label, but we'll talk about that down the track. You can show the decimals if you want to, if you really want to drill down, but then the columns get very wide. Next thing I want to talk about the date formatting. In the Edit User Preferences Dates tab, you can select the date format depending on whether you're in Western Europe or Australia. You'd have day, month, year, and in the US and some other countries you'd have month, day, year. So you need to select your date format. In the options, I like to see the month name, so there is no confusion between various countries using different date formats, and that does solve that issue. The time here, I like to show 24 hour, that's up to you. I like to show 24 hour and I don't show the minutes, and this allows you to have a narrow column, but you can see whether the activity is starting at the beginning of the day and finishing at the end of the day. So these are my recommended settings for all projects. Let me show you that in P6. So at the moment, I can't see when these activities start and finished. If I go to Edit User Preferences and I go to Dates, as I say, you need to select the date format depending on what country you're in. I usually leave the month name, but I select 24 hour and I don't show the minutes. And this then gives me a narrower column. When I select close, you can see now that these activities are starting and finishing all sorts of times during the day, which I personally, when I'm doing construction scheduling, I like to clearly show that my activities start at the beginning of the day and finish at the end of the day. But again, that's entirely up to your organization and your company. I do like to show these dates and times. One of the reasons why is when you are assigning a constraint, if you don't show the time, then in earlier versions of the software, it was set the time at 00. What happens in later versions of P6 now, if you go to the status where you assign a constraint here, what you'll find in later versions, if I have a start on, is that when you go here, you can see the time, but in earlier versions, you don't. So we'll cover that next. Users may see and set activity start and finish times in the date picker box. So basically in version 20, you could not see the time when you set a date in the date picker box. So you could set a date, but you wouldn't see the time. And when you were setting a constraint, often this would select midnight. That doesn't make sense for any constraint. What happened in version 21 is you can now see the time irrespective of the format that you have in the user preferences when you're setting an actual start or an actual finish or a constraint and that sort of thing. And this is very useful. This is a great enhancement because, as I said, P6 usually picks the wrong time when setting actual dates, constraints, and also suspend and resume. But I do recommend that you still show the date in the columns as well. Let me show you how this works. So I'm in P6 version 23, and for example, if I want to go and set a start date, I can click on the start here and it's selected a start date, but I can go down here and I can change the start date to a different date, and I can change the time if I want in the date picker box. If I want to select a suspend date, I can click in the suspend here, and you can see that you normally don't suspend in the morning, but for example, if I want to suspend this, and for example I want to suspend it on say the 26th of June, I can say that I get suspended at 1600, and you can enter in the suspend time here. So I suspended it in the afternoon, and if I'm going to resume say on the 10th of July, I can click on the resume. You normally don't start at 1600 on the 10th of July, so again it allows me to select a proper time here of 0800. I'd normally resume in the morning, select. So you can see now that I have a suspend and a resume, and you'll see here that this is necked because when I set up the bars, I make sure that it necks for suspend and resumes. So you'll find that in version 20 and later, when you go to set a start or finish or constraint, for example, if I want to set a constraint against this activity here, and I go and set a start on, again, you'll see that I see the time here. So that's a good enhancement. So let's have a look at an earlier version now and how that works. So I'm in version 19 here, P6 version 19. You can see that I'm showing the time, and if I go to this activity here and set the start date here, and I go to the date picker box, you'll see I'll see that time because I've set the time in the edit user preferences. But if I don't show the time, and I'm in version 20 and earlier, when I go to the date picker box, I don't see any time at all. So it's really important if you're in version 20 and earlier to go to edit user preference here and make sure that you show at least 24 hours, and you'll see where the activities are starting and finishing at the beginning of the day and the end of the day. So back to version 23, if I go to edit user preferences and I don't show the time, I can't see the time here, but in the date picker box, I'll always see the time. So that's the difference, but I do recommend, even if you're in version 20 and later, I do recommend that you always show the hours here so you can see whether activities are starting and finishing at the beginning of the day and the end of the day.